Welcome back, everybody, to Two Guys and a Stack of Comics. My name is Reed. Along with me, as always, is Mike. Mike, how you doing, sir?
I'm doing good, Reed. How about you?
Doing good. We survived the free comic book day madness, and I
It was
think
awesome.
you and I both kind of walked away with the same observations about free comic book day. We talked about how impressed we were with the indies, how the content they're putting out is just way better on that huge day. But there is a weird commonality in that when we say indie book, what's interesting is basically when you and I use that term, we're essentially talking anything that isn't Marvel and isn't DC.
Right.
What is interesting is, though, there's even kind of a difference in sort of some indie books, in that you'll have stuff like Invincible, which, while an indie book and a property now, the creative team got to decide everything that was, right? There was no lore for it. Kirkman kind of got to create his own thing. Same thing for stuff like The Boys and things like that. But what is interesting is in the indie space, you have characters like Conan and you have characters like the Phantom,
Right.
and I think one of your favorites, Flash Gordon,
Right.
where these are characters much like Marvel and DC characters who have pasts, have histories, have stories, have, established lore, and yet somehow these characters are getting more faithful adaptations in terms of if you look through a Conan book and you just even look in the free comic book day thing that they're given. So obviously not like, oh, a huge monetary thing and that's where they do it. You get these pages in the back that talk about the lore of the character, that talk about where these stories fit, their appreciation for Robert Howard, why they're putting the story together the way, how well researched it is. Same thing for stuff like the Phantom for Flash Gordon. It's weird because like it's not even one of those things where you can go, well, it's an indie book, they get to create it. These guys are doing the research to match the lore and fit the character arcs. So it's just interesting in that like the excuse that we hear from folks in the big two is, well, it's just too hard to keep up with continuity. There's no one version of the character, all that stuff. Mike, why do you think it is that in the indie space, Conan, Phantom, Flash Gordon, I think you've mentioned this Blade Runner quite a bit. They stick within the lore of Blade Runner really well. I mean, Dynamite Comics with James Bond has done very similar things. There hasn't been a comic in a while, but when they did, they stuck pretty well within the established framework of James Bond. Why do you think even with properties like that, the indie books seemingly do more than the big two do with characters like Batman, Spider-Man, and Wolverine?
It used to be where, folks in the 80s and 90s that were coming into a legacy character like Superman or Spider-Man. And even in the 60s, they would go back to the archives. And the publisher had copies of every comic almost, and you could go back there and read. It's not like today where everything's online.
Hmm.
But
Yeah.
back in those days, when you were taking on a legacy property, yeah, you would go back and read some of those older issues and kind of understand what happened so that you could continue the saga and you could write your story. And at some point, past the 90s and into the 2000s, continuity just got really screwy, for lack of a better term.
Hmm.
Everything was loosely based on this or that, or sometimes they just broke everything completely, which detracted from a lot of readers. But these great old characters that are coming out again, and you take a look at Conan, 1920s, Phantom, 1930s, Zorro, 1920s,
Flash Gordon, same time frame, yeah.
Flash Gordon, 1930s. These characters have a long, storied history, and I think when a creative artist and writer team comes off of the big two, and then they get into the realm of these indies, it's just very exciting for them to pick up these characters, and they know at least the books that are being produced that we love, like this new Phantom is great. Conan's been amazing for a year and a half, going on 2 years. Flash Gordon is going on a year. It's awesome. When you embrace that, the fundamentals of that character, and just set out to write your own story within that time frame, you really have a kind of open canvas. But of course, you have your archetypes that you have to stick to. But that's half of the fun. You know who James Bond is. You know who Flash Gordon is, and you're going to write a new tale. You know what Ming is like, and Dale, and so the Shadow is another one that gets rewritten from time to time. It almost feels like the creatives have a breath of fresh air or a little shot of caffeine, and they go into these projects and just create something amazing. Um, and the difference, I don't know, on the other side is it just seems kind of tired and old. But I do feel like if you were a true creative team writer artist and you got the assignment of, say legacy character like, Batman or whatever, that you would do your best to research who that character was and
Mhm.
try and breathe some fresh air into it, like these creatives are doing on these indie product projects, which are so amazing. Like, head and shoulders above almost anything else that's put out there. You can tell their hearts are in it, and they're swinging for the fences.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing that you touched on that I would have to agree with is I do think there's an old-fashioned sense of wonder from the people who are writing these characters, where it's more they probably know I'm not going to get rich off of this, but man, I love this character and I want to write great stories, and that's the whole goal, right? When you see Jim Zub talk about writing Conan, all the people who write in that book, the love they have for the lore, the love they have for that's the whole point of why they're reading it, they're writing it, why they're involved. I think what's happened with DC and Marvel, because of the prevalence of Disney, Warner Brothers, whoever you want to blame, Batman doesn't exist as a character anymore. He's a property. Batman,
Property.
he's a film universe, a video game universe, an action figure line, a cereal line, a fruit snack line, and oh yeah, there's a comic book too. And
And
I think
diapers.
bath bath salt, I mean bath salts, bath soaps, I mean all kinds of stuff, right? They exist as all these things, and I think that's the part that's happened is Batman and Spider-Man and Superman went from characters in a story to properties. And so, unfortunately, the part where they originated out of and the part that you and I care the most about is probably the thing they care the least about at this point.
And
Because
you
it,
wonder how much of it is the guys up top just pushing down this agenda. We need something that can fit in both a video game and possibly a TV spinoff show, and an animated, and go and write me a story like that. And it's kind of a shame because in the old days, these legacy characters, it was truly a lot of hard sweat and work and a little bit of luck for you to get put on a book like this back in the old days. And now it's just like whoever's in the lobby that,
who works for Marvel and doesn't have a
yeah,
book currently?
it just kind of seems like, well, let's give him a try or her a try. And when in the old days, when you were an artist and sometimes you really wanted to, like, let's take, for example, Neil Adams. Like, he always wanted to draw Batman. And
Mm-hmm.
he didn't get to draw Batman right away, amazingly enough. You
Had to
know,
work his way up to it.
he had to work his way up to it. You know, John Romita, you know, he got put on Spider-Man um, after Steve Ditko left. John Buscema,
Yeah.
he took over Avengers for Jack Kirby. And it was just like, they had all earned their stripes along the way. These were hardened veterans of the comic book trade. And they got put on books like that. It was a big deal. And it became very prestigious in the 80s, in the 70s, in the 80s to get an assignment like that. And it would last for years. That's something else we don't have here.
Well, and I think that's what you touched on, I think is huge. And I think it's just as much as I want to blame the corporations, I do think the writers and the artists also share a lot of responsibility in that. And one of the things you pointed out is getting the Amazing Spider-Man job used to be a big deal. And it was normally like, oh, that guy wrote like a really good side X-Men book. And then he wrote like a really good Silver Surfer run. And then he made like a Hulk run that was really popular. And now he's at the level where he's ready for Spider-Man. Right. And it's like, wow, he worked his way up.
Oh
Um,
yeah,
and I think what you used to have as well is when you talk about like Buscema taking over for Kirby and Romita taking over for Ditko, you could tell that while those men wanted to do their own thing, when you hear them interviewed and you read stuff about their careers, there was a sense of reverence of like, wow, man, they're entrusting me with Kirby's legacy. They're entrusting me with Ditko's legacy. I get to carry that on. And it's sort of we bring up a lot of analogies to sports on here, but it reminds me a lot of old school athletes versus modern athletes. When you look at, and I think the NBA is probably the most stark example of this. When you look at guys in the 80s and in the 90s, your Magic Johnsons, your Larry Birds, your Michael Jordans, those guys looked at the guys in the 60s who played in half empty arenas and full of, on
Will
tape delay.
Chamberlain. Yeah,
Yeah, they looked at the Bill Russell. They looked at those guys and understood, well, those guys were not millionaires and maybe they didn't have the same technical skills that they did. They understand that, hey, man, because of the hard work, the sweat, the tears, everything that those guys poured into the game grew. And now we get a chance to play in packed arenas on TV in front of millions of fans. And then the
right.
income started driving up. What ended up happening is you have a generation of players now who looks at those old guys in the 60s, and there's a few guys who appreciate the legacy, but most kind of like, man, I'd wipe the floor with all those idiots in the 60s. Do you know how great I am? And the attitude has shifted from the old attitude of players used to be, man, I need to earn the fans every night. They pay to see me play. It has shifted now to where athletes have more, hey man, you get the privilege of watching me instead of I get the privilege of having this job to entertain you. And I feel like that's what's changed
That's
in comics
that's a whole
is
paradigm shift there.
is that comic book artists, comic book writers, while they didn't always have the biggest agreement, you could tell when you hear guys like Frank Miller and some of those guys interviewed about when they took on Daredevil, when they took on Batman. They loved the character, they loved the legacy, and they knew I don't want to let the fan base down. They are entrusting me with something Kirby worked on, or something Steve or Stan worked on, or Neil Adams worked. Like Frank Miller, you can tell because he revered Neil Adams so much when he got a chance to do Batman, there was a part of him like, I'm going to do Neil proud for what he did because he raised it to a level, and I don't think we have that anymore. I think they pay lip service to it, but I think the people who write modern comic books can give a rip about Stan Lee's legacy and Ditko's legacy and
You know,
Kirby's legacy because it just doesn't show in the passion and what they're writing.
and it brings to mind a story from the 70s when Jack Kirby went over to DC and Carmine Infantino gave him carte blanche. You can do whatever you want, you can, whatever, but we do ask you that you try and help us with a few books, but, we do expect you to draw some of our main characters. But other than that, you can do whatever you want, Jack. And Jack, you could tell in his interview and what other people have said that he was really, he was given a couple of Superman titles, a Superboy title to draw, but he took it with respect,
Mm-hmm.
and of course his style still showed through, but he was careful about how he drew things and plotted things, and he was very respectful of. He's like, I don't want to take work from any other comic book artist. I know you're going to give me. And they're like, no, no, you'll be fine. We'll put you on Superboy, but while you're plotting your new books. And so, yeah, he drew several issues of Superboy and Superman, but he had the honor and the respect for the artists that were working before, even though
Mm-hmm.
DC's a company that, well,
He
he
had
had
his problems with.
he had bad interactions with both Marvel and DC over his career. So what are you going to do? But he did go back later in life and say, that was his happiest moment when he got free reign to create his new universe over there at DC. So that was kind of special. But yes, even Jack Kirby had reverence for those that came before him. And so, you can tell these new indie creators have reverence for these characters. Jeremy Adams is doing a great job on Flash Gordon. You can tell that they really appreciate and respect, and they're having a lot of fun.
Well, what's
And
interesting is, it's the same names too that are the guys that are successful at the big two. What's interesting is like Jeff Johns is probably one of the better modern creators in terms of, his legacy while he's moved on to indies too. But when he was at DC, what made his books great is when you read Hal Jordan's Green Lantern run, it felt like Hal Jordan. It felt like he was still writing the same character that had been come up with all those many years ago. When he wrote Barry Allen, when he wrote Wally West, when he was writing Arthur Curry with Aquaman and all that, you could tell, yes, he was doing his own thing, but he had a reverence and a sense of pride in the character. He never wrote a character where it felt like, I don't really care about this character's history. I want to do my own thing to redefine the character or completely change everything about the character. He may have done these great grand mythology spanning things that changed, the circumstances of the character. But the core of Hal Jordan, Wally West, Barry Allen, Arthur Curry all stayed the same. Jeremy Adams does the same thing right now. That Wally West run that he did, part of why we liked that so much as fans was it felt like Wally, it felt like Linda, it felt like a great Flash comic. Mark Wade, while he has, I don't know that he's quite as good as he used to be, where he's fantastic as his world's finest. It feels like it's a Batman tale, it's a Superman tale. When he writes Justice League, he captures the essence of it, and you can tell he's not taking those books lightly. He's looking at it and trying to do the best he can to honor what came before. I feel like that's the problem we have with a lot of modern creators is if you have no appreciation for the past and you simply just look at, hey man, I'm the writer on Spider-Man. I do what I want. It's really difficult to say that you're going to earn fans. And we just see that happen in that, the
and
most. Go ahead, Mike.
I think it's a bit of a burn and churn kind of thing.
Hmm.
It's become kind of like a dog eat dog, and it didn't used to be that way. And I don't know if it'll ever get back to where it was, but it used to be when you got put on a book, you were on that book for a good 2 years, unless you went south. Then they pull you
Well, and
off of
now, I
it.
mean, now a 2 year run,
If
like
you were on a
they'll.
run, it could go 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years or more. You know.
No, if a creative stays on a book for 3 years now, they have like his monumental legacy on this title. And it's like, it's great that you went 3 years, but you compare that to what some of these other writers used to do, like, Kurt Swan on Superman, right? You have decade spanning things. And it's just, sadly, I almost feels like there should be like a limitus test for creatives of like, okay, you want to write Spider-Man, you need to pass like a Spider-Man certification test that shows that you can.
I
And, I,
know,
and
right?
I'm sure a lot of these writers know a lot about the comic books. I'm sure they have an understanding of it. I'm not saying that like all of them don't, but I think one of the biggest issues you have is there just should be some sort of character Bible or something that dictates what you do and don't do. And I think that's the coolest thing about Conan is Conan, and when they do those letters pages in the back, we always mention those. The reason those are so cool, whenever they change anything for Conan or do a different spin on something, they always have that really cool page in the back that explains, here's what we were thinking. This is
Yeah,
Howard's work. This is what Howard intended it to be. Here's the original appearances of the character. We
yeah.
wanted to do our own spin, but here's why we did that. Here's where we believe it lines up, and we
Yeah.
think it honors Howard's legacy.
It's so cool.
That's
Nobody else does that.
and it's something where like I don't think Marvel could do that because I don't think they'd be able. Like, I would love to have seen that attempt of like, well, when we had Mary Jane cheat on Peter Parker and he ruined his life to save her, and then she came back and left him anyway and treated him like he was a weirdo. We really wanted to honor the legacy. And it's like, there's no way you could pitch that. You just wanted to do something extreme. And I think that's the thing that's sad is if these folks would think through a little bit more when they make these drastic changes, and at least they could provide something where you as a fan could go, okay, I don't like it, but I can see where you're coming from. I can see why you got there. I can see the threads you're picking up on. Instead, they'll just do stuff now where it's like, oh, Nightcrawler's gonna kill 10 people. Like, that's completely against the history of the character. Well, it was a circumstance. It's like, that doesn't make any sense. And I think that's all we're asking for out of these things is I don't need a creative on X-Men to be able to say, well, in issue 267, it'd be great if they could, but I don't need you to be able to do that. I just need you to know that, hey, like, Nightcrawler's kind of like a priest. He doesn't murder people. Like, I don't need you to recall his exact first words and origin appearances, but maybe like, hey, he's a good guy who doesn't skewer people and throw them into space. And I just wish we got a little more of that.
But how cool is it for us to have these great titles out like Flash Gordon and Conan and the pretty soon the Phantom? You
Some
know you're going to get some really good, great original storytelling, and you're going to get introduced or reintroduced to some of the most iconic and classic characters of all time.
on the characters who honestly are kind of the whole reason that we have the Batmans and the Super. And that when you look at, Batman, there's different people who say it's a mix, but almost everyone kind of agrees Batman is sort of an amalgamation of the Phantom and Zorro,
Shadow.
like in the shadow, right? There's a little
Yeah.
bit of those three, you blend it in, and you kind of get that there. And so I think that's the cool thing with getting some of these older characters. And I'd love to see us keep getting more. I'd love to see Zorro get the treatment we've seen for Flash Gordon. I think the Shadow, while he's had some comic books, I'd love to see a Shadow series in the vein that we've gotten to see Conan. Even a character like Dick Tracy, who was never the biggest deal. He's had a really good comic the last couple of years. I think that's the weird thing is these
Excuse me.
old character, Lone Ranger might be another one, like these old characters that have kind of been buried by time, who basically almost built the industry by being successful before, being like the precursor to them. That might be the future, is going to these characters where you kind of see the origins of superheroes and the origins of a lot of stuff we have. And because the monetary stuff of it's a property is gone, it might lead to more. Because I think that's honestly, I think that's the biggest differentiator of why these succeed. Is when they write a Conan comic book, they are only concerned with the Conan comic book. They are not trying to sell Conan toothpaste and Conan action figures and Conan Funko Pops. I'm sure they'd love to if they could, but
That
they
that
know that's
toothpaste
only
would
going to
not do
happen
any good. Reed.
if.
That toothpaste would not take.
But no, it's fascinating to see. And again, I really hope Phantom's the third one because, man, I mean, if you'd have told me 5 years ago, I would regularly enjoy a Conan and Flash Gordon title more than I do any Batman or Spider-Man book on the stands. Like, you're insane, man. That's never gonna happen. Not that I didn't like those characters. I've always thought Conan was cool. I wasn't a huge Flash Gordon guy, but I always knew the character. That every month I look forward to those two books, and hopefully Phantom's the third one that can be in there. It's kind of crazy, and just I think it just shows where comics are at. It's a weird place where comics are right now. It's just really strange that you have kind of, I think indie titles are sort of way up here, and the big two is down there. It's just it's a, as you said, it's a world flipped upside down. That perspective shift is crazy. Do you think, Mike, at a certain point that we'll ever get back to where it's more the character driven comic book stories are what these companies go for, or do you think it's just that's out in the world and it's always going to be comic
I
books
think
or the Z tier thing they don't care so much about?
I think it's a toss up right now. I do feel in my heart of hearts that eventually the new Jeff Johns um, or will come around and write the story that needs to be written, and it'll be an old-fashioned story, new, slightly new angle, but the character you'll recognize. And I don't know if it's going to be Batman or Superman or Spider-Man or whatever, but they're going to take that classic approach again from a modern new angle, not really trying to destroy continuity, but just create good old fashioned stories like we used to get. And I think when they do, hint, hint, X Men with all the original crew, when they do, that comic is going to sell like gangbusters, and it'll pave the way for some better
Better
storytelling.
stories. I think sadly I think the only thing that would lead to comic books getting more prominence would be if the superheroes would all fall massively out of favor in terms of movies, TV shows, and those other properties became less valuable. But as long as they got a Marvel rivals and movies making $1 billion, I think they're always going to look at the comic books as chump change that we don't need to put much into. I think Marvel, to me, what's interesting is I think DC is turning around quite a bit. I have
And
been
All In has been
all
pretty
in
successful.
has been successful. There's been 6 or 7 titles that are actually really solid and on good footing now.
And it's
I
more in that vein that I was talking about.
I think Marvel, if D, what will really catch the whole, because look, as much as they're behind, Marvel is the comic book industry. As much as DC's taking, me and you are DC guys, Marvel's the one who sets the standard for everybody. As I think if DC can actually gain quite a bit of ground on Marvel, it will force Marvel to wake up. And they'll have to look and go, hey, what the heck, man? Like, I think the biggest thing that would help Marvel Comics get back is if this Superman movie is a huge success. Because if the Superman movie blows Fantastic Four out of the water money wise and the DCU gets rolling, I think Marvel will look and go, hey man, we got to figure out what the heck is going on. And then maybe they'll right the ship. But I don't know. But what I will say, it's a fantastic time to be a comic book fan because even when Batman, Superman, and Spider Man are down, you get the Phantom, Conan, Flash Gordon,
I
James
know.
Bond. You get all these other ones that are out there
It's
to kind of
great.
carry that there. And it's pretty cool. Let us know, what do you guys think down below? Do you think these older titles with older characters are more successful because there's more reverence for the character and more importance put on the comic book, or do you simply think it's just a talent gap and more talent's being driven to those? Let us know, what do you guys think down below, and if there are any other classic characters that you think deserve a revamp in the vein of Flash Gordon or Conan. Let us know what you guys think as well. As always, folks, thank you guys so much for watching. God bless you. You have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody.